Leave it to Joe Bastardi to whip up another storm of his own. He's tweeting, holy hell, because of the Antarctic. And it's not as hot as hell as alarmists predicted. In fact, it's ice levels that are the problem. They hit a new record. Say that again, Joe?
Yeah, they hit another one today. It's like nothing stops it. It's 30 to 40 days ahead of schedule. Normally, they reach their peak ice late in August, early September, and they are way ahead of schedule down there. And this is something we've been looking at for the past several years, that the dance between the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere balances out because of the natural cyclical events of the atmosphere, the whole system. When one shrinks, the other expands and then goes back and forth. And global sea ice is well above normal because the Antarctic is so far above normal. This is a global issue, isn't it? We're supposed to look all over the place.
Well, what does that mean if it's growing? But if it's growing there, I'm sorry, if it's growing there and it's not growing elsewhere, who's right on this? Well,
it's starting. The Arctic is beginning to reverse. You see, Neil, the Pacific and the Atlantic were very warm in tandem, just like they were in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And those of you who've seen me on the show know how much I think we're in that particular era, but we're coming out of it. And within 5 or 10 years, the Atlantic is going to be back to normal and above once the Atlantic switches back into its colder cycle. And as I've said many, many times, Dr. William Gray at Colorado State forecasted all this from the 70s, that we go into a warm cycle, we get to this part, start cooling back down again. But what's amazing is, if you had the Arctic as far below normal than you did a couple of years ago, as the Antarctic is above normal now, people will be screaming and yelling and going crazy. But you don't hear a darn thing. And the reason why is because the missive is getting reversed right in front of you.
No, the Penguins are clearly talking about it. You can see they're flapping about it.
Yeah,
here's what I want to know.
I'm worried about an emperor penguin invasion.
But I can remember as a kid, that's all I was, all those Time magazine cover stories, documentaries, New York Times stories on the global cooling, the big freeze to come, Leonard Nimoy scaring the you-know-what out of us about being ready for the great winter that was going to grip the world. Maybe they were right. They were just 40 years early. But it does say something about consensus views. What's going on?
We were in a cold cycle. I said this several years ago on this network, that we were going back to where we were. By 2030, the global temperature is measured objectively by satellites. Remember, we've only been measuring temperatures objectively since 1978, would return back to where it was in 78 because we went through the cold cycles in the Pacific and on into the Atlantic. So it's natural, if you warm the tropical Pacific up, the Earth is going to try to warm up. Once it adapts to it, it levels off like it has the last 15 years. When it starts to cool, down it comes, and it's all cyclical in nature.
All right, I have no idea what you just said, but I think what you just said is that you can't buy the consensus at the time, because the consensus now says global warming, although they changed that for marketing reasons, just climate change. You can never go wrong calling it climate change.
But
it was 40 years, but wait a minute, I think I'm the expert here. Why don't you just listen? 40 years ago, we're talking about great global cooling, and I guess it gets back to, who do you believe? What do you look at with these cycles, or whatever you want to call them, what's really going on? Because they're talking about us spending trillions of dollars to fix whatever's going on right now.
Well, what I look at is what happened before. If you know what happened before and you see similarities to it, you simply say, well, it's going to be similar again. What I was trying to say was that we were in a cold cycle in the 60s and 70s in the oceans. So the atmosphere cooled. When the cycles got warm, the atmosphere warmed. Now we're going back in the cool cycle. Guess what? In 20 years from now, we're going to be hearing about the next ice age coming again.
Wow. Amazing. So you're going to be the French Climate Commission or Joe? I'm going with Joe. That's me. That's just my bias. All right, good seeing you, my friend. In the meantime...
Thank you for having me.